Aaminah, and I'm a senior studying psychology here. And today I'd like to talk to you all about the concept of retention, specifically in the context of Black students at university institutions. And so here's an overview of what I will be going into specifically, and my implications for my research that falls into the quadrants of policy, theory, method, and practicality. And to start is a little bit of history or a little bit of background pertaining to Black students in higher education. And so what we're finding is that access to four-year institutions for Black students are steadily rising. However, retention rates or graduation rates are fluctuating. And so that insinuates that there is a gap between access and graduation. So something between those 4 years when the students got to campus and before they graduate, something has happened that's impacted their ability to graduate on time or even graduate at all. And the common rationale behind this, or the common reasons as to why students are not graduating, is either inadequate K-12 preparation, low financial support. However, my research focalizes on poor campus climate. And so the less common discourse is that psychological reasons is behind the reason why students are not necessarily graduating and at the rates as they should be graduating. And so we have a quote from Dr. Harper, who talks about the connection between psychological dimensions as well as racially inclusive agendas implemented at predominantly white institutions. And so the significance of this research is that students of color soon, very soon actually, will occupy the vast majority of four-year institutions. And so as you can see, already you have Black students who are underrepresented within this statistic. And the reason why it's so important to do the work, specifically looking at psychological dimensions, is because we want to make sure that we're not perpetuating the same cycle of poor representation of faculty and students among predominantly white institutions, which do contribute to the feeling of isolation. A lack of representation of that contributes to the lack of feeling as though they have a place at the university. And so the reason why we need to rethink how we look at retention is because we have years and years of data that show that what predominantly white institutions are doing are ineffective. And so we have a quote from research from dating back to the 80s all the way to the 2010s. And they basically have the same theme in saying that Black students or students of color in general are not satisfied, or they don't feel like they have a place at their university. And so with that, I asked, how might we engage the inherent tensions between Black students and the general campus to build inclusive communities where they thrive, as well as how can we make those efforts sustainable? And then the objectives of my study is to highlight the condition of Black students on the spectrum of racially inclusive practices implemented by predominantly white institutions, as well as to analyze the phenomena of psychological distress of Black students attending predominantly white institutions. And so for methodology, the setting is at a large public institution located in the Midwest. The participants is considered a convenient sample, as I only have 52 participants, and all of them identified or self-identified as Black and or African American. And so for instrumentation, I utilize face-to-face interviews and survey. For design and data analysis, I use thematic analysis, specifically semantic and inductive reasoning, examining two variables, looking at the perceptions of general campus, racial climate, as well as perceptions of social support, and then subscales used to analyze the social isolation, emotional satisfaction, and motivation to complete their studies. And so the findings, we have two main themes. And the first is transparency. And so if you look at this particular quote, you see that the participant is urging universities or university administration to outwardly show support for students. Whenever in this particular situation, whenever something had a severe impact on racial climate, they would prefer if administration sent out either some form of notification acknowledging the fact that there is a problem on campus. The second theme is intersectionality. So for this particular participant, they stated that a lot of times when they do go to places that is there for Black students specifically, quote unquote, they often find that identities do not intersect. And for this particular person, they found that being queer and being Black presents an entirely different culture than of the culture that they find at the two places provided for students to go to on campus, and that they would like to see various identities not being treated as mutually exclusive. And so to continue the findings from the survey, we have 78% of students who are not satisfied with the racial climate, 86% are not satisfied with higher administration's effort towards inclusive efforts implemented by the university. 62% attribute racial navigation throughout their university as an emotional or mental stressor, and 41% experience mild symptoms of distress since attending a predominantly white institution. And so here are some theoretical solutions based off of both the readings and responses from participants. And the first is to establish and or strengthen the relationship between students and administration. The second is to implement more racially inclusive and exclusive spaces on campus for students. And the third is to actively highlight mental health services geared towards Black students specifically. And that could take place either through email, advertising all around student counseling centers, just openly advertising, as I found a lot of participants were oblivious to the resources available to them, specifically as Black students. For future research, I would like to focalize specifically on first-generation low-income Black students at predominantly white institutions, specifically the phenomenon of high-functioning anxiety and depression, as well as looking at race-related stress in relation to achievement. As for the limitations of this study, it would be data collection, interviews. So open-ended questions sometimes went on for quite a bit, and it proved a little bit more difficulty trying to transcribe and again apply thematic analysis. The other is population samples. Because this is a convenient sample, this is not necessarily a representative sample. Other things consider is ethical considerations, limits of confidentiality whenever recording participants. I would like to acknowledge Dr. Philip Bowman at the University of Michigan for helping me put together my study, as well as my support team, which includes a wide array of people here, and also the UIUC Trio Ronald E. McNair program. Here are my references. Thank you.
Aaminah, go ahead and stay up. We're going to start questions. Anyone have questions for Aaminah on her topic? I have one. Yeah. Can you go back to your findings page? The last one, I believe, where you had the percentage. I think you had 41%. Yeah, experienced mild symptoms. When you did your interviews, if you can recall, did any of your students that you interviewed possibly consider dropping out because of the stresses that they were going through at the PWI?
Yes, so that was actually one of the questions. So has an emotional stressor due to your participation at a predominantly white institution caused you to have thoughts about dropping out? And there were, I would say, a handful of participants who said they have considered it. They found that a lot of times their anxiety of achievement, specifically the pressure of having to achieve and prove themselves as Black students often signified high stress for them. And so for very few participants, they have considered dropping out due to that stressor.
But no one that you interviewed actually tried that?
No.
Okay.
I have another question.
Yes.
So I'm just wondering, like, for the interviews that you conducted, so how was, like, did you just ask them, like, yes or no questions, or did you, like, ask them more specifically about why they are not satisfied with, like, racial climate and things like that? So, like, how was the question asked?
So these were considered open-ended questions, and so I asked open-ended questions, but as stated before, a lot of students tend to go on tangents, and so what I would do is I wouldn't say stop them, but I would come in and say, so how has this impacted your ability to succeed at the university, and or how has this impacted your views at the university, and what can a university do to better ensure that you're better supported?
Did you do this at the University of Illinois or another university? Like, who did you
Here.
interview? Since you just said,
Oh, yeah.
and then you said University of Michigan, so I was just.
Oh, that was my faculty advisor.
Oh,
He was at the
okay.
University of
I didn't-
Michigan. Sorry.
Oh, okay. I didn't know
Sorry.
if maybe you were at the University
No.
of Michigan. Okay.
How long did the so how many people did you interview? Sorry, I don't know.
So I interviewed about 60 folks. Yeah.
And then how long did that period of time take to interview all of them?
So this took about a whole academic year. So I started in October.
Okay.
Interviews. Yeah.
Sorry.
No, no, it's fine. Thank you.
So were you kind of like strategic about the time just like for other factors that could have affected their answers, like were you strategic about the time that you interviewed them, or?
So something that's very interesting is the political climate. I believe we have a quote that talks about the political climate, and so this was a little shortly after elections, and so it was generally felt that the tensions on campus were very extreme. And so while I didn't find a huge discrepancy of responses or differences in responses, I did find that a lot of participants post-election did acknowledge the fact that political climate had something to do with the tensions on campus.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.